Good afternoon, my name is Keith Ellis and I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Alliances here at IAG Consulting, and today is Casual Fridays, as you can see, and the discussion today, or the question that we had today is what's a RCOE? What are the components of a Requirements Center of Excellence? How do you go about dealing with that? And so whether you call it a Requirements Management Office, RCOE, which is Requirements Center of Excellence, Center of Practice, these have slightly different connotations, but let's just talk about Requirements Centers of Excellence and what you might have, regardless of what you want to call it. Let's just talk about what you have to deal with. And the fundamental purpose really is to improve your overall requirements maturity. Let's just define that as the outcome that you're trying to achieve by implementing this. You want a more mature, more repeatable, more sustainable practices within your organization so that you get better software, right? Better projects that are more repeatably on time, on budget, and on function. If that's what your outcome you're trying to get, then there are 6 basic capabilities that you're trying to drive within the organization. And they're the underlying capabilities associated with requirements maturity. It's the staff competency within your organization, building and developing them, making more consistent, the processes of doing requirements, the deliverables associated with requirements, or the artifacts you might call that, the organization itself, which to some extent is the RCOE. It's like, how are you managing the infrastructure? How are you dealing with the resources associated with the framework through which you do requirements? And then the technology of doing requirements and the techniques associated. So while process might be, what are you doing? The techniques are, how are you doing individual steps when you're calling upon analysts to do specific activities like model process. What technique are you using for that? Are you using a use case? Are you using, what kind of structure are you using for that? Underneath all of this, the capabilities, when you're looking from a CIO perspective down, or you're looking from a CEO perspective down on the organization, which is the RCOE, there's really 3 basic things that you're trying to put in place. I'll call it infrastructure, resources, and framework. And what I mean by this is the resources, for example, are fairly straightforward. The resources are, where are the analysts? Who are they reporting to? How are you managing the skills? How are you developing them professionally? All these other kinds of things. So how are you dealing with the resource base within the company? And there are different ways of doing it, obviously. Every RCOE is going to be a little bit different, but it's something that you need to contemplate when you're setting one up, to say, how is that going to work? The infrastructure is basically starting to describe the services and the communication of those services. So what are analysts expected to do for the organization, and how are they going to do these things, and through what mechanism are they going to be provided to the organization? And then finally the framework what is the way we're going to do the requirements? So if you look over the competence and say, well, it's the processes and the techniques and the technologies, who is it that sets the process, the techniques, and the technologies associated with doing requirements? And how empowered is that organization to continue to change and manage? And through what framework are we managing all that? And that's really what we mean by framework. So the RCOE has to deal with 3 very important elements, okay, that you're going to evolve over time and improve the maturity of over time. There are 3 basic fundamental components that you need to now be communicating to the organization and operationally managing. But fundamentally, you also need to look at all of these 6 underlying capabilities. And this is where RCOEs sometimes really fall apart, is that they get too focused on, say, deliverables and enforcing a particular template or standard. Or they get too focused on, a process and trying to enforce a specific process. Or they get too training-centric or something like that. And they don't get beyond the training aspect of it and start saying, well, wait a minute, now we're competency-based, which means it's all about role, it's about managing roles, it's about managing alignment of people to tasks, it's about defining roles in a better way, and it's really also about hiring practices. There are many elements of maintaining a stable base of competency, or they may be overlooking technology, etc. So there are elements in this that they'll tend to have blind spots in their definition of how they go about building these capabilities within an organization. Now, not every organization is perfect. It's not idyllic. There are going to be compromises based on the way the organization wants to structure, but you should have a degree of sight into each of these things, and you should have some plan of building action or of building an organization, even if you need to do it collaboratively with business. But fundamentally, the structure and success is going to be based on, well, how centralized or decentralized are many of these elements in terms of how you're going about building the COE. We've built dozens of them. So we've got pretty good insight into what works and what doesn't work. If you want more on that, just certainly give me a call or call your IAG person within the organization here, and we can have a much more detailed conversation about how to build and manage and develop a requirement center of excellence. With that, thank you very much for your time and attention today. Hopefully those 5 minutes have been useful for you, and I wish you all great success. Cheers.